Right now, as you listen to my voice, physical air vibrations are, they're hitting your eardrums, they're mechanically moving these tiny bones in your head, and literally, permanently altering the chemical structure of your brain.
It's actually kind of wild when you think about it that way.
It really is. So
Hmm.
welcome to the deep dive, where today we are just completely destroying the myth that knowledge is something you quietly store in some invisible filing cabinet in your head.
Right, because it's entirely a myth. I mean, most of us operate under this assumption that the mind is a secure, static vault.
Like a hard drive.
Exactly, like a hard drive.
Yeah.
You read an article, you extract this neat little folder of facts, and you tuck it away for later retrieval. But if we look closely at how learning actually functions, well, that mental model just falls apart completely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission today is to radically rethink what knowledge actually is. And we're working from a really fascinating set of sources.
Yeah, they are super dense, but incredibly rewarding.
Totally. On one hand, we have this intricate visual map.
Yeah.
It honestly looks like a 19th century naturalist's field notebook,
Hmm.
like complete with sketches of ants, spiders, and bees, but right alongside these intense geometric diagrams.
Yeah, the juxtaposition is really striking.
And pairing with that, we have this conceptual summary from Chapter 20 of a project called the FIRE Project.
Mm.
And both of these sources, they converge on this one radical argument, which is that knowledge is not an object you possess.
Right.
It is alive, it's deeply physical, and it is entirely relational.
And the shift in perspective here is just profound because the central thesis we are exploring today is that knowledge isn't about, accumulating information. It's a continuous process of translation.
Translation.
Right. And crucially, it's a process that relies absolutely on physical matter and, our dynamic relationships with the environment around us.
So to really grasp this idea of knowledge as translation, I think we first have to look at what physically carries it. The visual map actually calls these the links to matter.
Because we tend to think of ideas as ghosts.
Right, exactly, like these abstract concepts just floating around in the ether, totally separate from the physical world.
We treat them like software that somehow doesn't need hardware. But the FIRE project argues that knowledge, it just cannot exist in a vacuum. It always rides on a physical carrier.
Like it needs a vehicle.
Yes. Every single time an idea moves, matter changes. The sources list these tangible links and they ground this whole philosophy in pure physics.
Right, like the air vibrations we just mentioned.
Exactly. Ears literally moving, neurons firing across synapses, muscles contracting to type a word. We're talking about ink marks on paper, pixels emitting light from a screen, the tools in our hands, even the physical buildings that house our institutions.
It reminds me of a virus. I mean, a highly beneficial one, obviously.
That's a really good analogy, actually.
Right, because a virus cannot teleport across a room. You can't just abstractly beam infection from one person to another. It needs a physical medium, like a water droplet or a surface, a handshake.
Yeah, ideas require that exact same physical scaffolding.
Right. And if you, the listener, just pause for a second and think about what is happening right now, you are physically participating in this deep dive. Your device is pushing air, your eardrums are vibrating, and if that physical chain breaks, well, the knowledge just stops dead in its tracks.
What's fascinating here is how this physical reality completely redefines our understanding of the self.
Oh yeah, the concept of identity gets totally flipped.
It really does, because if knowledge is always moving between bodies, tools, environments, the boundary of where you begin and end gets very blurry. The FIRE framework actually explicitly rejects the concept of the isolated mind.
Like the old brain in a vat thought experiment.
Exactly, it throws that out entirely. Instead, it proposes the self in relations.
Meaning identity isn't something that just happens in isolation.
Far from it. Our identity, our very capacity to know anything, it only emerges through participation.
Right. The visual source calls it being a node in a web of life and meaning.
Yes. You are quite literally spirited and animated by your interactions with other people, your physical environment, cultural history, your technology. You just cannot separate the knower from the environment they're knowing in.
Like the master carpenter example.
Oh, right. When a master carpenter evaluates a piece of wood, the carpenter is reading the wood, sure, but the tools and the grain of the wood are also dictating the carpenter's movements. Every act of knowing changes the environment, and it leaves a physical trace.
Okay, so if our very identity is braided into this physical relational network, how do we practically go about building knowledge?
Mhm.
Like, how do we translate the raw physical world into something we can actually understand without just getting totally overwhelmed.
Well, this is where the visual map brings in those vivid animal metaphors to explain the actual mechanics of this process.
Right, the insects. It breaks knowledge down into three complementary operations, which are the ant, the spider, and the bee.
And these aren't merely decorative metaphors, by the way.
No, they're super literal.
They illustrate the mechanical progression of how an embodied mind translates the physical world into usable meaning.
So let's start on the ground floor with the ant. The ant represents the operation of collect.
Right, gathering.
Yeah. This is us gathering the bytes and bytes from the literal ground of experience. It's our direct sensory inputs, pure observations, just the raw episodes of our lives.
Like an investigative journalist starting a news story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The ant phase is the journalist walking the streets, requesting court documents, recording interviews. You aren't judging the data yet, you're just hauling leaves back to the colony.
It is the necessary foundational step. But a pile of raw data isn't knowledge.
No, it's just a pile.
Right. If you stop at the ant phase, you are really just hoarding trivia. You have a mountain of facts, but no orientation. So to make that data usable, the mind has to string a web between those isolated fragments.
Which requires an entirely different operational mode.
Exactly. And that brings us to the spider.
The spider. So this represents the operation of connect. The journalist takes all those raw court documents and starts pinning them to a corkboard. The spider weaves patterns from, all these disparate points.
This is where we categorize, compare, map, and build networks out of the raw material.
Yeah, the spider creates the hypergraph. It finds the structural integrity between the ant's isolated bytes.
But even a brilliantly connected web of information isn't the final product, right? I mean, a corkboard covered in red string is just a map. It isn't sustenance.
Which leads to my absolute favorite part of the source material, the bee.
Yes.
The bee represents the operation of transform, because the bee takes the patterns the spider wove and synthesizes them into nourishment for itself and for others.
This is the creation of meaning and culture.
Yes. And there is this one quote from the visual map that is just staggering. It says, "No single flower contains honey. The colony makes it."
I mean, that phrase completely dismantles how the modern world views education.
It really does. We treat learning as this desperate quest to find the right flower.
We assume that if we just read the perfect book or, listen to the ultimate guru, we will extract the pure knowledge.
But the sources argue that real knowledge, the meaning that actually sustains a society, that's the honey. And the honey does not exist in nature. It doesn't exist in any single flower.
Right. It only emerges through collective work, through thousands of visits, and the literal physical transformation of the pollen by the colony.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves that knowledge is a translation environment, not a storage facility.
A bee doesn't just store pollen in a hexagonal vault and leave it there.
No, it ingests it.
Exactly. The pollen is ingested, mixed with enzymes, dehydrated by the fanning of thousands of wings, and physically altered into a completely new substance.
And we do the exact same thing with information. We ingest the physical data, combine it with our relational context, and actively change it into shared culture.
Okay, so the bee transforms this raw, connected experience into honey, into meaning. But how is that meaning actually structured once we've made it?
This is where the visual map transitions from insects into geometry. It highlights three specific geometric knowledge primitives, which are the sphere, the cube, and the cone.
And again, these aren't just pretty shapes. They serve as cognitive frameworks. They're epistemological tools that dictate how we organize our thinking, depending on what we actually need to accomplish.
Okay, so the first is the sphere. And the sphere is designed to hold relations simultaneously without any strict hierarchy.
Right. Think about the surface of a sphere. There is no top, no bottom, no beginning, and no end. Every point is connected to the whole.
So it's ecological.
Exactly. This shape represents ecological thinking. So if you are trying to understand a complex family dynamic or, say, the climate of a rainforest, you have to use sphere thinking.
Because it's chaotic.
Right, you have to hold all the chaotic simultaneous relationships in your mind all at once without trying to force them into a linear list.
But you can't always operate in a sphere, right? Sometimes you need boundaries. You can't hand a chaotic family dynamic to a lawyer. You have to structure it.
And that's exactly where the cube comes in. The cube stabilizes knowledge for use.
Because a cube has rigid edges, it has sharp corners, flat sides.
It gives you boundaries you can actually manipulate. When you translate fluid spherical knowledge into a cube, you create an artifact.
You can mentally rotate a cube inspect its different facets, and physically hand it to someone else.
It represents operational, stable knowledge, turning that chaotic rainforest ecosystem into a piece of actionable conservation legislation. That is moving from the sphere to the cube.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the final shape is the cone. And the cone represents the mechanism of compression.
Compression, right?
The map shows this wide base at the bottom, labeled experiences and events. And as you move up the cone, it gets narrower. Those thousands of raw experiences compress into patterns. The patterns compress into concepts. The concepts compress into simple principles.
And finally, at the very apex of the cone, you arrive at a simple truth.
Right. And visually, this demonstrates how the human mind distills just the overwhelming noise of life into something that provides direction.
It's a necessary filter.
I have to push back on this, though, just a little bit, because the word compression implies a destructive process.
Oh, sure.
Like, think about compressing a massive audio file into a tiny MP3.
Yep,
You would
that's
inevitably lose the rich highs and the deep lows just to save space.
Hmm.
So if we're taking 10,000 messy, nuanced, beautiful human experiences and squeezing them up a cone until they become one simple truth,
right.
aren't we destroying the very nuance that makes the data valuable in the first place? Doesn't a simple truth just become dangerous dogma?
Well, that is the exact danger of poor compression. And the FIRE framework completely anticipates it.
Oh, it does.
Yes. At the top of the cone, the simple truth isn't meant to be a static dogma or, a period at the end of a sentence. It is meant to be a compass. It distills the essence to provide what the source calls orientation. And to prevent that destructive loss of nuance you mentioned, the visual map introduces a specific mechanism right at the apex of the cone.
Which is?
The aiming system 2.1.
The aiming system 2.1. Honestly, that sounds like the heads-up display in a fighter jet.
And mechanically, it functions very much like one.
Wait, really?
Think about how a fighter jet's aiming reticle actually works. It doesn't just paint a static dot on the glass and freeze. A jet is moving at supersonic speeds through a totally chaotic environment.
Right, everything is shifting.
So the aiming system constantly calculates wind speed, target velocity, altitude, continuously recalibrating the reticle. The aiming system 2.1 does this for our simple truths. It explicitly instructs the user to hold aporia.
Aporia, that's a philosophical state of puzzlement, right?
Yeah.
Like the embracing of the unknown.
Precisely. Even when you have compressed your experiences into a simple truth, the aiming system forces you to hold the unknown variables right alongside it.
Oh.
You lock on to your guiding principle, but you constantly ingest new data, identify your knowns and unknowns, and adjust your trajectory. You hold your truth, but you remain able to recalibrate.
And the map explicitly ties this back to the phrase, I am, because we are.
Which loops us beautifully back to the relational self we talked about earlier. Your simple truth isn't some weapon you wield all by yourself. It is a shared compass, calibrated by the collective colony.
So we are constantly moving through these phases. We gather physical data like ants, we map it like spiders, we transform it into honey like bees, and we compress it up the cone using our aiming systems to navigate the world.
That's the process, yeah.
But where does all this compressed meaning, this honey, actually live?
Well, that brings us to the most expansive concept in the sources, which is the hyperworld.
The hyperworld, it sounded straight out of science fiction.
It does, but the sources treat it as a very tangible reality. The FIRE project defines the hyperworld as the representational layer of reality that humans continually build together.
So it's not like the metaverse or something.
No, it's not an illusion or a virtual reality headset. It consists of the representations that actually govern our physical lives.
Give me an example.
Language, money, the concept of a national border, mathematics, our legal systems, AI models, and even, digital note-taking systems like Obsidian where we link our thoughts.
It's like a collective overlay. Going back to your video game analogy earlier, the hyperworld is like a massive heads-up display that all of humanity is just agreed to see and interact with.
That's exactly it.
Because you can't physically stub your toe on the concept of mathematics, and you can't, put a law on a wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
But they are entirely real. They govern how physical bodies move through physical space, and they are built entirely out of our compressed shared knowledge.
And we sustain that hyperworld through a very specific operational protocol. The visual map lays this out at the very bottom as translation environments. It introduces the acronym FIRE.
Which stands for?
Focus, inspect, retain, enable. This is the protocol for how we actually participate in the hyperworld.
Okay, walk me through how that protocol works in practice. like step by step.
Sure. It acts as an engine of continuous participation moving through this loop. So first, you focus on an environment. This is the act of doing.
Okay.
Your doing generates physical feedback, which you then inspect. This creates knowing.
Got it.
You then retain that pattern by translating it into representation. So this is the act of speaking or recording it.
Right.
And finally, that representation is shared to enable others, which requires listening, which immediately triggers a new doing.
So doing leads to knowing, leads to speaking, leads to listening, leads to a new doing. Focus, inspect, retain, enable. It's just this endless metabolic cycle.
And this raises an important question. If meaning is constantly moving between forms, bodies, and worlds through this cycle, and if every stage physically alters the environment, then the traditional view of knowledge is fundamentally broken.
Right. The filing cabinet, it's gone.
You cannot put the hyperworld in a filing cabinet. You must completely abandon the idea of knowledge as a possession. You can only participate in it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, navigating your own life? We started this deep dive by throwing out the invisible filing cabinet. And what we've replaced it with, based on the FIRE project and this incredible visual map, is a deeply demanding but really beautiful reality. Knowledge is the ongoing translation of embodied experience.
It moves through physical matter, through our relationships, and through the representational hyperworld.
Right. We gather the raw ground truth like ants. We weave the connections like spiders. And we physically transform those patterns into shared meaning, into honey like bees.
And we do all of this by constantly running that FIRE engine, focusing, inspecting, retaining, and enabling through doing, knowing, speaking, and listening.
We are constantly remaking ourselves and the worlds we inhabit. In fact, just by engaging with this deep dive today, you have run this exact cycle. You took the physical air vibrations pushing out of your speaker, you gathered those bytes and bytes, you connected them to your own experiences, and you integrated them into your internal map of the hyperworld. You didn't just store abstract information today. Your physical brain has actually changed.
Which leaves us with a final thought worth mulling over. We've established that every single act of learning leaves a physical trace in the world. And we've seen that real knowledge is the honey we make together as a colony, not just a single flower we extract from in isolation.
Right.
So as you move through the rest of your week, take a hard look at your daily media diet. Look at the sheer volume of information you consume. What physical shape, what trace is that diet leaving in your environment? When you read that article or doom scroll that feed or listen to a broadcast, ask yourself, are you just hoarding pollen like a trapped ant? Or are you actually using the FIRE loop to help the colony make honey?